So Nicolás Maduro is now due in a New York courtroom, and this moment is far bigger than one man walking into a building. Because as this legal move unfolds, the United Nations is already raising serious concerns about what the United States is doing in Venezuela. And this isn't happening quietly. This is happening in public, under international scrutiny, with consequences that stretch far beyond a courtroom and deep into the balance of global power. What makes this situation so volatile isn't just the legal process itself, it's the timing, it's the message, and it's the question that no one inside the international community seems willing to answer directly. Is this about justice or is this about leverage? For years, Nicolás Maduro has been one of the most polarizing figures in global politics. To his supporters, he is the leader who stood up to foreign pressure and refused to bend to Washington. To his critics, he is the face of economic collapse, political repression, and a humanitarian crisis that forced millions to flee Venezuela. Those opposing narratives have clashed for more than a decade, but now they are colliding inside the U.S. legal system itself. As Maduro becomes the subject of proceedings tied to New York, the United States is framing this as accountability under the rule of law. Officials point to allegations involving corruption, sanctions violations, and international criminal conduct. From Washington's perspective, this is portrayed as a lawful extension of existing policies meant to pressure an authoritarian government. But the United Nations is not echoing that confidence. Instead, UN officials are signaling concern, not necessarily about Maduro as an individual, but about the precedent being set. Because when one nation uses its courts and enforcement mechanisms to pursue a sitting or former foreign leader, it sends a signal to every other country watching closely. And that signal can either strengthen international law or fracture it. This is where the tension begins to rise. International law has always lived in an uncomfortable space between moral ideals and political reality. In theory, no one is above the law. In practice, power often determines who gets prosecuted and who gets protected. When the United States takes legal action connected to a foreign leader, critics argue that it blurs the line between justice and geopolitics. And the UN knows this history well. Over the years, similar actions have been taken against leaders from smaller or economically vulnerable nations, while powerful states and their allies often remain untouched. That imbalance is exactly what fuels skepticism across Latin America, Africa, and parts of Asia. To many governments, this looks less like accountability and more like selective enforcement. That perception matters, because Venezuela's crisis did not begin in isolation. It unfolded under heavy sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and economic pressure that reshaped daily life for ordinary citizens. While Maduro's government is blamed for mismanagement and authoritarian tactics, many international observers argue that external pressure worsened the humanitarian situation rather than improving it. So when the UN raises concern over U.S. actions, it is not defending Maduro personally. It is questioning whether this approach actually helps the Venezuelan people, or whether it deepens their suffering while hardening political divisions. Inside Venezuela, reactions are deeply divided. Some citizens see this legal move as long overdue. They believe international pressure is the only way to force real political change. They see the courtroom as a symbol of accountability that never existed at home. Others see it very differently. They see another example of foreign interference, another attempt to decide Venezuela's future from outside its borders. They worry that legal pressure abroad gives the government an excuse to tighten control internally, framing every challenge as a foreign attack. And that fear is not abstract. History shows that external threats often strengthen hardline positions rather than weaken them. Governments under pressure rarely soften. They consolidate. They restrict. They mobilize nationalism. That dynamic has played out repeatedly across the world, and Venezuela is no exception. This is why the UN's voice carries weight here. When the United Nations raises concerns, it is signaling that the international system itself feels strained. The organization was built on the idea of sovereignty balanced with cooperation. But cases like this test that balance in real time. Can a powerful nation pursue legal action without destabilizing an already fragile region? Can accountability exist without appearing politically motivated? Can justice be separated from strategy? Those questions don't have easy answers. From the U.S. perspective, officials argue that allowing leaders accused of serious crimes to operate freely undermines global norms. They insist that legal pressure is preferable to military intervention and that courts offer a peaceful alternative to force. But critics push back. They argue that courts become political tools when jurisdiction stretches across borders without mutual consent. They warn that today's target could become tomorrow's precedent, used by other nations in less restrained ways. Imagine a world where every powerful country claims the right to prosecute foreign leaders it opposes. That is the scenario the UN fears, because it risks turning international law into a weapon rather than a safeguard. Meanwhile, global reaction is mixed. Some Western allies quietly support the U.S. approach, even if they avoid public endorsement. Others remain cautious, emphasizing dialogue and negotiation instead of escalation. Countries in Latin America are particularly sensitive, given a long history of U.S. involvement in the region. For them, this is not just about Venezuela. It is about memory. Memories of coups, sanctions, and interventions still shape political instincts. And even when intentions are framed as lawful, the past informs how those actions are interpreted. Back in New York, the courtroom becomes more than a legal venue. It becomes a stage where international norms are tested. Every argument, every filing, every statement is watched not only by lawyers, but by diplomats, activists, and governments around the world. And Maduro's presence, whether physical or symbolic, forces an uncomfortable reality into view. This is what global power looks like when it intersects with law. The United Nations, for its part, is urging restraint. It emphasizes the need for multilateral solutions, humanitarian considerations, and respect for international frameworks. It warns that unilateral actions risk undermining trust in the very systems designed to maintain global order. That warning should not be dismissed lightly, because once trust in international law erodes, it is incredibly difficult to restore. When nations begin to see legal systems as extensions of political rivalry, cooperation collapses. Agreements weaken, conflicts harden, and ordinary people pay the price. Venezuelans are already paying that price. Economic hardship, migration, and uncertainty define daily life for millions. Whether this legal move improves or worsens that reality remains deeply uncertain. What is certain is that this moment will be remembered. It will be studied by future diplomats. It will be cited in future disputes. It will shape how other nations respond when faced with similar pressure. And that is why the UN is watching so closely. Not because it supports Maduro, not because it opposes accountability, but because it understands how fragile the line is between justice and power, and how easily one can consume the other. As this case moves forward, the world will not be judging only a man. It will be judging a system that claims to stand for fairness, order, and restraint in an increasingly unstable global environment. Whether that system holds or fractures may depend on what happens next.